A ratio is a comparison of two or more numbers using division. Oftentimes we simply write a fraction to indicate a ratio. However, we're going to see that ratios can actually be represented in three different ways. And so for this example, let's find the ratio of stars to stripes on the American flag. So I know that there are 50 stars, and I know that there are 13 stripes for the colonies. So one way to write this, as I said, is as a fraction, 50 over 13. We can also write a ratio using a colon. You may remember that from middle school. So we could say 50 to 13 using that colon. Let me make that a little bit easier to see. And then finally, we could also write this out using words. We could say 52 to 13. Either of those would be acceptable ways to write a ratio. Typically, we're going to stick with these first two, and of those, especially this first one, the fraction is the one that we're going to see most often. We have to make sure, as we're talking about fractions a little bit, we have to make sure with ratios we always simplify like we'd simplify a fraction. No matter what form we write it in, it has to always be simplified. The three ratios we wrote up above with the American flag, none of those could be simplified. Even this first one, 50 over 13, while we could change that to a mixed number if we were working with fractions, ratios should not be written as mixed numbers. Remember, they're comparisons of two numbers or more using division, so making a mixed number would not make sense. So let's take a look at a couple more. I suppose in this case we're going to have to just make up some data because you're not in my classroom at this point. But let's say, just for sake of example, in one particular class we have 10 boys and let's go with 12 females. So I can write that ratio as 10 to 12. However, if you wrote it like that, you'd be wrong because, as we just mentioned, you do need to simplify everything, and you'd simplify the same way you'd simplify any fraction. So in this case, we could change the ratio to 5 over 6 or 5 to 6 as our ratio. Next up, to find the ratio of females to total people, well, I don't need to recount anybody. We know from the previous example in our make-believe class, there were 12 females, and I know in total there's got to be 22 people. 10 guys and 12 girls is going to make 22 people total. So I can write that ratio as 12 to 22, but once again, we have to make sure we always simplify that. We can simplify that to 6 to 11. So just for, again, sake of example, let me write that a different way. Let's say we write that ratio as 6 to 11. All right, and then last up, we want to find the ratio of legs on 3 spiders total, and that ratio, compare that to 2 dozen eggs. I picked this one just because I want to show you what happens this time. So typical spider is going to have 8 legs on it, of course. So 3 spiders are going to have 24 legs. 2 dozen eggs is going to be 24 eggs altogether, and so I get the ratio 24 over 24. Now, if we simplify that, that would simplify to just 1 if we're thinking fractions. But remember, ratios are comparisons of 2 numbers, so we have to make sure with ratios we'd write that as 1 over 1 or 1 to 1. Simply writing number 1 down won't be enough like we could do with fractions. We have to make sure we have a ratio in this case.